Did you guys have a good weekend? I always have so much energy on Mondays. Oh, and most people are saying, oh, it's Monday. And I'm usually like, oh, it's Monday.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I come in class like 10:09 and then I get into 10:11, 10:12. I'm hardly.
Oh, I don't look at attendance. I look at poll questions,
Oh,
right? So somebody could be logged in, especially, so I don't really ever. So the only thing about being late is I usually give updates to start, right? So as people are coming in, I'm usually reminding you of things like people keep forgetting to do assignments, or, like people forgot to do the case. At the beginning of class is when I just kind of give like the, remember that we've done this and this is where what you need to do. So if you're coming in late and you're missing that and you're not kind of following the schedule, that's the only thing I'd be worried about. In terms of attendance, your participation is poll and talking. I don't really look to see whether you're logged in or not. I'm going to give this to you. So if somebody raises their hand or has a question and I don't see it, just kind of alert me to it. I do have it on my side, so I should be able to see it. But just kind of keep track if somebody is, or chat. So that I never look at.
Okay.
All right, so that's for you. And just interrupt me if you're seeing something. Yeah, and if somebody's trying to talk through either one, just let me know, because I can go back and look at the chats and things like that.
Sounds good.
It's not going to be so much today. Today is a pretty heavy lecture day, but just in case. All right, well, it is 10:10, and like I was saying, I have 22 people here, right? So just a reminder that we are going to pick up where we left off last class. We're talking about activity-based costing, which is a management system. So what this management system is going to do for you is it's going to help you make strategic management decisions about your products and about your customers, right? So what you're going to see is sometimes if your factory is complex, then trying to use your job order costing system to make management decisions doesn't work. Meaning like setting prices, right? If you're using your job order costing system and saying, this is what it costs me to make my product, and then you're marking it up and you're losing money, then you don't really know what it's costing you to make what you're making. And so you might need an activity-based costing system. All right, so the premise behind activity-based costing is that you are going to go in and do activities to make a product. You're going to do activities to service a customer. And the premise behind this is when I do an activity, I consume my resources. It costs me money. And so I'm going to tie that cost to that particular product or to that particular customer. It's going to really kind of show me what it's costing me to make what I make or to service the customer that I am servicing. Okay. So we are, as I said, did you get a chance to look at C&C Sports in the chapter? So I'm going to pick out some of the parts that I think, I know there's tons of numbers that are going to go through here. So I'm going to go through and just kind of try to hopefully make sense of what the chapter was showing you. So we're going to set up an activity-based costing system for C&C Sports. And if you looked at the chapter, and if you remember back from chapter 4, we've already done job order costing for C&C Sports. We already know how they apply overhead in their accounting system. All right, so we're going to set up this activity-based costing system so that we are able to analyze their 3 different products. So they make jerseys, they make jackets, and they make pants. Step number 1 would be to walk into C&C Sports and identify the different activities that happen to make these products, right? So what I know is that I am going to get a rate for each one of these activities. Whatever I do, those activities are consuming my resources, are costing me money. And so I'm going to distribute those costs to those 3 different products, depending on how many times I have to do these activities. All right, so I'm going to identify activities, then I'm going to develop my cost pools. Now I'm talking about those activity rates. Once you have your activities, like I said, you're going to get an activity rate for each one of those activities. The numerator is where you pool all of your indirect costs into each one of those activity rates. Instead of one predetermined overhead rate, we're going to have a rate for each activity. And then once we have that, in order to get the rate, we're going to divide it by our total activity measure, whatever it is that drives that overhead or those indirect costs. And once we have that rate, then we're going to allocate our overhead or our indirect costs to the different products so that we can see what it's costing us to make, what it's costing us when we make those products. Okay, so when we go in, or what they told us about C&C Sports is that they have identified all of these activities. So the first activity that they have identified is designing the products, right? So this is going to be a product level of activity. They're telling you that they have people working on designing the jackets, the pants, and the jerseys, right? So you have that whole activity of doing those design costs. And then the next cost is warehousing. And what I'm telling you is warehousing is the process of taking the material from the raw materials warehouse with the forklift and bringing it down to the factory floor. Right, so that's an activity that is going to happen. I'm going to get a rate for figuring out what that costs us. Then once the material is on the factory floor, the different products require you to cut the material differently. So we're going to look at that activity and figure out what it costs us to cut the material. Then we're going to sew the jerseys, sew the pants, sew the jackets, and then we're going to package it. And then all the while, we're going to be looking at those general organization sustaining costs that we're going to group up and basically toss aside. They're not caused by the products, like the rent of the factory, right? The utilities that are just keeping the lights on in the factory. And so we're going to kind of pull those out. Okay. So I've identified my activities. What I need to do is get a rate for each one of these activities. So I need to get a driver. I need to get my activity measure. So here is your activity measure. When I'm looking at designing products, what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide it by the number of product lines I have. So this is going to be a product level of activity, right? I'm saying all of these costs are being incurred to make the individual products. And so I'm going to divide it evenly among the products, right? That warehousing is a batch level of activity. So I know that I am going to divide that by the number of batches that I'm going to be running. And then also packaging is also based on a batch level of activity. Remember, the batches mean that the units aren't causing the cost, it's the batches. So I know when I'm moving the material from the warehouse to the factory floor, it's not the material for each pair of pants. I can make 50 pairs of pants from that material that I have just moved. And then packaging is the same. So I can combine these two if my denominator is the same, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Cutting is going to be based on the number of cuts I have to make for the different products. Sewing is going to be based on direct labor hours. And then, like I said, those general administrative, those general organization sustaining costs will not be assigned to products or customers. All right, so this is what they show you, and this is stage 1 allocation. So I identified my activities, and I have identified my activity measures. So what I need to do now is pool all of my indirect costs into those numerators, into those different activities. How does that happen? So that happens through something called stage 1 allocation. So here are all of the indirect costs. Here's your overhead, right? So this would come right from your income statement. I usually look at all the costs that are happening in this company, and then I try to put them into these different activities that I've identified, right? So how do I do that? Well, let's take a look at your indirect labor, right? So these would be like the supervisors in the factory or the janitors sweeping the floor, right? And so what I would ask them, and originally it was very subjective and through an interview process, I would say, tell me how you spend your time. What did you do today, right? I'm trying to figure out how much time they're spending doing these activities that I have identified. And so you can see up here, the supervisor said, well, 20%, 19% of my time today I spent looking at product designs. And so I would take the total cost of that indirect labor. And if 20% of it is done or spent doing product design, then 20% of it will be pulled into that activity. So again, today, it's not that subjective because those people are wearing bracelets or they have cards. And so I don't have to ask them. The computers are tracing what activity they're doing. So it's much less subjective, and it's putting those costs into those activities for me. Huge improvement. Okay, so you get the idea here? Okay, so you can see, take a look here. Take a look at what is, well, I'll save this for later. Okay. All right, so what I have then, by the time I'm done, I have all of my indirect costs pooled into all of these activities, right? I'm going to add them all up then, and this is how much of my total indirect cost is caused by all of these activities. Okay, let's first talk about this one, that Chanel machine. All right, so the Chanel machine is only used when we make jackets. So what I want to remind you here is that any cost that I can directly trace to a product, I'm going to trace that cost directly to that product. It's only the indirect cost that I need to apply with my activity rate. Just like job order costing, it's just the indirect cost that I need to apply with my predetermined overhead rate. So what I know about that Chanel machine is it's only used for jackets. It makes those varsity letters. The Chanel machine is, it makes that rug-like effect that you have on those varsity letters. And so since I only use it for jackets, I'm taking the depreciation of that, right? I'm pulling that out. I'm going to trace the indirect costs that are tied to that machine directly to jackets. I'm not going to put it into activity rates and apply it. All right, does that make sense? So take a look, 216,000, even though it is overhead, because I can tie it directly, I'm going to tie it directly. And then also kind of think about, we're getting the total cost of making our product. There's so much effort that goes into indirect costs Don't forget, direct material and direct labor are still direct costs that you are also tracing directly. This is just the indirect costs. Okay, is everybody good here? All right, so now let's talk about these. Those general costs, those organizations sustaining costs, remember, are not caused by these products. So they have been identified and I'm basically throwing them away right now. Right, so when I look, here is the rent of that factory. Right, that is happening whether I am making jackets or not making jackets, whether I'm making pants or not making pants. So I know that I'm going to group that up, not caused by the product, not tied to the product. Okay, so basically what I have then are the numerators for my 4 different activities. Right, here are the indirect costs that are caused by doing my 4 different activities. Total activity in the cost pool, or total cost in the cost pool, divide by total activity measure. Everybody good? Okay. So the activity measure, remember we said when we were looking at that activity measure, we said this was a product level of activity. We were going to divide it evenly based on the product lines. So here's that cost. Right, think about that rate. Here's the cost that I'm saying this is all the indirect cost caused by that activity. I'm going to divide it by my 3 product lines, and this is the activity rate, cost per product. So here's the total that was pulled into warehousing and packaging. It was a batch level of activity. So what I need is the total batches that I'm going to run, and I'm showing you this down here. So in the textbook, they broke all of this down, but remember, you're taking the total cost, dividing it by total activity. So here's the total number of batches that you're going to run for all of your product lines. So here's the units you're going to make. We're going to be making a whole lot of pants, but when you look at the batch level, like I said, you can make 50 pairs of pants from that material that you're bringing down to the warehouse. So if these are the units you're making and you can make 50 by doing that activity, then you're going to have to do that activity 3,670 times when you're making pants. 3,670 times, you're going to take that forklift and take that material and bring it down to the factory floor so that you can make pants. If this is how many units you can make in that batch. Does that make sense? How many batches do you have to do for jerseys? Well, you can make 35 jerseys. We have orders for 66,500 of them. So if I can do 35 at a time, then 1,900 times I'm going to do that activity for the jerseys. Putting the material on the forklift and bringing it down to the factory floor. Just remember, it is the total activity. You've got to add them all up here. So here I've got it all added up for you. Not always going to be the case. I'm looking for all of the batches for all of the products. Okay, so I have my total cost divided by total activity, and now I have my activity rate. Instead of 1 predetermined overhead rate, I have 4 activity rates, 1 for each one of these activities. And right off the bat, this is useful to me because this is telling me what it's costing me to do what I do. So when I take that total cost of warehousing, right, the total cost that I'm spending of moving that material down to the factory floor, what I can see is every time I do that activity, it costs me $29.50, right? So that is a really good piece of information for you because you're looking at, wow, that's expensive. Maybe I can move something a little bit closer, or maybe I can make an improvement to make it not cost so much. Or each one of these product lines is costing me $47,932 in indirect costs. So this might be important to me if I'm thinking about maybe adding another product line, right? I'd probably be looking at that, and I might be looking to see how many batches I would have to do. right? So this kind of breaks everything down for you so that you can plan ahead as well. All right, one more thing I want you to make a note of here. Take a look, because I know we're going to talk about job order costing as well. I don't want to confuse you as I'm trying to show you just the mechanics of this, but take a look at what this company is doing. They make mostly pants, right? So they are going to make 183,000 pairs of pants and not so many jackets here, right? So you can see that these are the units that they're making. So think about what job order costing is going to do with all of these indirect costs. We distribute overhead based on labor. There's going to be way more labor time going into this, right? Larger jobs, right? We're going to put more labor in. Your job order costing system is going to say most of the overhead should go to pants. But take a look at the batch level of activity here. Job order costing doesn't pick up on that. You can only make 5 jackets when you are talking about doing this activity. Job order costing is going to take most of the cost here and put it onto pants, where this activity-based costing is saying, hold on a second, I have to do almost the same amount of batch level of activity for this product as this product. And so it will break that cost up into the individual products, where job order costing is just going to put most of it to pants. Okay. All right, so we have our rates. And what are we going to do now? We're going to take the rates and we're going to distribute it now to the different product lines. So where I had all of this totaled here, now I want to break it back down into the individual product lines. Because when I'm looking at this, I'm going to say $47,932 dollars per product line. And so when I'm looking at my 3 product lines, I'm going to multiply this by 1, right? I'm going to divide it by, so I have all of this and I am going to spread it out evenly over those 3 products. When I look at those batches, it costs me $29.50, right, to do that process of moving the material down to the factory floor. But now it matters how many times I'm doing that activity for the individual product lines. I'm going to take that $29.50, and for pants, I'm going to multiply it by the 3,670 times I'll do that activity for that product. And then I'm going to multiply it again, same rate, but by the different activities. Here's the rates. I'm doing it 3 times for each one of these products now. I'm breaking everything down. Same rates. But here you can see, here's the $29.50 for the pants. For the pants, I'm going to have to do that activity 3,670 times, and it's going to cost me $29.50 to do that activity. So this is how much of that cost pool is caused by pants. Right, and you can see down here for the, this should say jackets, same $29.50, but you're doing 3,600 batches. So you can see activity-based costing is basically assigning the costs evenly to these product lines, where you're not going to get that with job order costing. It doesn't pick up on those batch levels or product levels of activity, right? All of these product levels of activity that are evenly distributed among the products are going to go more to pants because we're going to have more labor cost. All right, is everybody good here? Okay, so you can see all of those indirect costs now. Now I know how much are being caused by each of these 3 different products. So what I want to do is get a cost of making each one so that I can figure out what to sell it for, right? Make a management decision, like set a price. So here I have my overhead costs, and what I'm telling you is watch out here, because it takes a whole lot of time to do this allocation of the indirect costs. What you have to remember is to add the direct materials and the direct labor before you are setting a price, right? We still have the 3 product costs here. So when I'm doing my pants, here's the total overhead from my activity rates, right back here. Here's the total overhead that I have for my pants. And I want to get it on a per pants or per unit basis. So I'm dividing it by the number of pants that I'm gonna be making, which means that when I'm making pants, each pair of pants should have $2.20 of overhead in them. Add that to the direct materials and the direct labor, and I'm looking at a cost of $12.20 per pair of pants. Same thing with the jerseys. Here's the total overhead caused by jerseys, and I'm making 66,500 of them. So each one is $3 of indirect cost or overhead. Add that to materials and labor. It's costing me $16.20 to make jerseys. And then the jackets, remember that Chanel machine. All of what I pulled in from that Chanel machine can be traced directly to the jackets. And I'm doing that. So I'm adding that to what was allocated from the other activities. And then I'm making 18,000 jackets. So each one is $34.50. Adding that to materials, adding that to labor, and this is what it's costing you to make a jacket. Okay. Yeah.
Can you go over this, like where you got the overhead per unit, the direct materials per unit, direct labor per unit?
Oh, that's going to be given.
Okay.
Yeah, material. Well, so no, so the materials and labor are easy. So all of the overhead here. So let me just go back. So we took, first of all, here's all of the overhead, right? So here's the indirect costs. First, we pooled them into all of our activities. So these are the numerators for my 4 different activity rates. So when I look at the activity rates, what I'm saying is I'm going to distribute all of the overhead tied to these activities instead of all of it based on labor hours or machine hours here. So I have the overhead, the numerator, I'm dividing it by total activity measure, and what I'm saying is this is how I'm going to distribute that overhead. And when I took those rates and then multiplied it by the activity for each one of those products, what I have is how much overhead is distributed or caused by each one of those products. Are you good? I'll go. Are you sure you're good?
Yeah, I didn't realize the other cost would be given to you.
Oh, material and labor? Yeah, that's the easy part. Yes. Okay. All right. So from here, then I can do a management thing like set a nice accurate price, right? Because I have taken into account that I have lots of batches that I'm doing for these jackets, and I have that then traced to the jackets. And so I have a good accurate price for my jacket. Okay. I want to compare this now to job order costing to show you job order costing only uses unit levels of activity. Job order costing is going to distribute the overhead based on the size of the job. And remember, we are making a whole lot of pairs of pants, right? So just first of all, let's talk about the differences, right? In terms of the numbers, you're not going to be allocating the same amount of overhead. So this could be a nice theory question for you. Are you allocating the same amount of overhead? Why are you not allocating the same amount of overhead? What's causing the difference between the overhead allocation here? You pulled out, oh, go ahead, Daniel.
Would it be that like what you said about the batch numbers not being defined for each product?
So the amount, so first of all, the amount that you're allocating is different because you are pulling out your organization sustaining costs, right? So right off the bat, it's not GAAP. You're not allocating your organization sustaining costs. So if you look at the 400, the difference between the two, that's the rent and the utilities that are caused just from lighting the factory that aren't getting allocated. And then this problem here, if that's the only difference, that means that I don't have any period costs added in here either, but you could have period costs added. It should be total indirect costs that are going into my activity-based costing system. So if the costs are different by $499,537, does that mean that that it costs you less to make what you make when you're using activity-based costing? Ashley?
No, they're just allocated differently.
Right. So it's not that oh yes, I'm going to use activity-based costing, it will cost me less. It's costing you the exact same thing. This is just a different way of allocating overhead for a different purpose. One is financial statements, one is management decision. Okay. All right, so now let's get into the real difference between or what your job order costing is going to look like versus activity-based costing and why it's much more accurate. So this is what we did back in chapter 4, right? Job order costing. We said that we applied overhead at C&C Sports based on direct labor cost, and our rate was 125% of labor cost. So when you look at the labor cost for pants, jerseys, and jackets, it's not surprising that the labor cost is higher here, because remember, look how many units you're producing. What we said was, how many units are we making? And then going one step further into labor dollars, labor hours. And so I have more labor cost, which means I'll be allocating more overhead in my accounting system to pants, right? Almost over half of it in my accounting system is going to be going to pants, and 31% of it will be going to jackets. And when you look at activity-based costing, over half of it is going to jackets. I mean, right, so if you think about what happened here, why is that happening? Because job order costing only uses unit levels of activity. And we already saw, and this is what you want to remember, these products that you're making, like the jackets, you could only remember make 5 of them in that batch. So the jacket is probably a more complex product, and those more complex products tend to be run in smaller batches. They tend to need more inspections, right, which is another indirect cost. These smaller, more complex products tend to cause more of the overhead, more of the indirect costs, and the job order costing system doesn't pick up on that. Your job order costing system is only going to say, I'm only making 18,000 of these. There'll be less labor costs, and so I'm going to distribute overhead based on only labor. But down here, your activity-based costing system picked up on the product level of activity. They pick up on those batch levels of activity, and they are allocating more overhead to the jacket because you do need to do more batches. They have to run them in smaller numbers. So think about how messed up your prices are going to be if you're using job order costing, right? What you're going to end up, like I said, you're going to end up over costing and overpricing your pants. And you're probably going to miss out on a market share. And this is your main product, right? You're overpricing, overpricing pants, and you're missing sales because your competitor knows what to charge for these pants, and they're going to get that sale. And then the same thing happens with the jackets here. If you're thinking the overhead is 31%, adding that to materials and labor, and then marking it up, guess what? Everybody's buying your jackets. And you think you're marking it up 50% or 100%, you're probably not even covering all of your costs. Okay. Much more accurately shifting overhead, because it takes into account, like I said, that batch level of activity, the product levels of activity. That's what really makes this system, in addition to more rates, much more accurately distributing your overhead. Is everybody good with this? So as I said, the mechanics of this are important, but last semester there was a ton of theory behind this. And I think people were focusing on the numbers and calculating the numbers, and then got totally thrown off by the theory. So I'm just making sure that you are all good all the way around. Okay. Okay, so just to kind of sum things up, high volume jobs are typically over costed with your job order costing, And low volume jobs are typically undercosted with that traditional costing system because it only uses a unit level of activity. In activity-based costing, this is corrected as batch-related and product-level costs are properly allocated to the products that are actually doing that batch levels of activity and doing those product levels. Okay, and the last topic I want to talk about is activity-based management. So management tells you you're running this factory that your labor costs are too high. So you need to cut your labor costs. So what's your first reaction? I need to lay some people off, right? But that's not where you want to start. If you end up just letting people go, what's going to happen is the activities that these fewer people have to do are going to be exactly the same, and they're just going to be overworked and they're not going to have enough time to do what they're doing. Right, so the idea here is you have to look at the activities that these direct labor people are doing and see if you can streamline that before you drop labor. Right, so look at the activities that the labor that use that labor resource, and this is what you're looking for: inefficient production processes, poor facilities layout. Right, maybe the person sewing at that sewing machine has to walk all the way across the floor to get the buttons and then walk all the way back. So that would be poor layout, and that's costing extra labor time, right? You want to make things streamlined so that things can work efficiently. So you want to get rid of all of those non-value added activities. And then also you want to make sure that your workforce is trained. You don't want them standing around wasting time trying to figure out what they're doing as well. Right, so you want to streamline their, so what you want to do is look at the activities that they do and fix that without just dropping people. So what do I mean when I'm talking about value added? So when I'm talking about you want to only have value added, what you're looking at, value added costs are costs that create the product that the customer would be willing to pay for. That's a good way to think about this, right? So you're thinking about, as you're making these jackets, what is it that you're doing that the customer is going to be willing to pay for? It might improve the quality, right? But the customer doesn't want to pay for the person to have to walk across the factory floor and back again constantly, right? So you want to eliminate those activities that have no value added to them. So this is how activity-based information is used today. And as I said, just looking at those rates will help you to see what it costs you to do what you do. And then from there, you can make improvements, right? $29, $30 every time I move that material down to the factory floor, maybe I can streamline that, right? So you're looking at your activities and really kind of looking at what it costs you for all of those indirect costs, very helpful. Product profitability, which we just did, right? Process improvement, customer profitability, same process, except you're looking at whether your customers are profitable or not profitable. Okay. All right, so we've covered everything. Now let's do some problems. Right, so this first problem is going to be a comparison, just like we did, of job order costing and activity-based costing. Let's take a look. So it says Voss Visuals produces tablets and books. Total overhead costs traditionally have been allocated on the basis of direct labor hours. So job order costing, your activity base, your application base, that's what you had from chapter 4, is going to be direct labor hours. After implementing activity-based costing, managers determined the following cost pools and cost drivers, and they decided that the general cost should no longer be allocated to products. All right, let's just take a look at what they're showing us here, because what they are giving me are the activities, right? Somebody has already come into this company and said, this is what this company does. They bind, they print, they do product design, And then here's your idle capacity organization sustaining costs. I'm also looking, and they've already done stage 1 allocation, right? So they've already taken all of those total costs and they've already pooled those numerators into those different activities. And they're giving you what drives those activities. So when I distribute these costs, they're telling you these indirect costs are going to be based on the number of units that you're making. When I'm looking at distributing these overhead costs, it's going to be machine hours. This is change orders. Product design is going to be based on change orders, the number of times you have to go in and change the order for something special for a customer. And then general, you know that this is the last we're going to see of this for job order, for activity-based costing. These are your items that are not caused by your products, and so we're just going to pull them out. So I already know I have my 3 numerators for my activity-based costing, and I also know that for job order costing, I have 1 numerator, and it will be all of everything, including those idle capacity organization sustaining costs. Right, and then here's some other information, more detailed about the tablets and the books. Right, so let's do job order costing first. Job order costing is going to seem simple now. Total estimated overhead for the year divided by your total application base, which is labor hours. So I know that I have my 2,212,000 in my numerator. Now down here, I need my total labor hours. So when I go look here, here's materials, here's the labor. This is for you, Brianna, I promise they'll be given. And then here's the direct labor hours. So they are projecting 30,000 labor hours to make all the tablets and 19,200 labor hours to make the books. Total application base means that I'm going to add these 2 together. And I'm going to get my predetermined overhead rate of $45 per labor hour. Everybody's good? So the idea, or what they asked you to do though, is not calculate the predetermined overhead rate. The question said, how are you going to value 1 tablet and 1 book using job order costing, right? If I'm going to use this system to set a price, I have to figure out what it costs and then I'll mark up from there, right? So I know that I'm going to calculate the overhead first. How much of my indirect cost is caused by books and how much of this is caused by tablets? Now this is where I'm going into the detail, right? So I know over here that 30,000 of these total overhead, total labor hours are being caused by tablets, and 19,200 labor hours are being caused by books. So I'm going to take that rate and I'll multiply it by the 30,000 hours to distribute this more to tablets, and take this rate and multiply it by the 19.2 to distribute it to books. So where is, or which products are causing this $2.2 million? More of it is caused by tablets because you have more labor hours. Okay. Is everybody good with that? So I want to get this now on a per book and a per tablet basis. So if this is the total indirect cost caused by tablets, and I made 62,500 tablets, to get this on a per unit basis, I'll divide this by the number of units. So I'll have the overhead per unit. And same thing here. If this is the overhead for making all of those books and I'm making 20,000 of them, the cost per unit, we'll take this and divide by 20. Okay, so I'm dividing by the 62,500 tablets and the 20,000 books, and you can see that here is the cost per unit. I want to add the materials and the labor given to us. to get the total cost under job order costing of making one tablet and one book. All right, so that's job order costing. We're basically going to do the same thing except with 3 rates rather than 1. Right, so if I'm going to use job order, if I'm going to use activity-based costing, now I'm going to use these 3 numerators, right? And they told us the cost driver was going to be the number of units, the machine hours, and the change orders. So now I'm not distributing anything based on labor hours. I have different cost drivers. So here's the numerator, right? 3 instead of that 1. So here's the numerator, and now I need the total activity measure. So again, I have to go over here. So this is number of units. I'm going to add these 2 together. Total cost divided by total activity measure will give me a rate per activity. Ashley.
I have a question. Is change order like batch or something?
So a change order is, so first of all, the unit batch product customer, those are general guidelines. So you can pick whatever drives the cost, right? So for change order here, this is going to be, that would be a batch, because what you're looking at is, you know, like when you order a textbook or when BU orders the textbook and you buy that loose leaf version in the bookstore, because the real textbook is about $500. So that would be a change order because BU places that order, but they say take out chapter 16, 15, you know, the ones they're not using. That would be a change order.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that would be a batch level of activity because in that case there, that would be the whole process of doing that change, but then you're going to make the unit same, you know, the units based on that one change. All right, so mechanic wise, are we good with this? 3 rates instead of 1? All right, and then we're going to do the same thing. If I want to distribute this to tablets and books, I take the $3.60 and multiply it by the 62,500 tablets or the 20,000 books to distribute this based on the number of units. Right, I'm taking that rate, just like I did with C&C Sports, taking the same rates, $360, $325 per machine hour, and then $60 per change order. But now I'm breaking it down into the individual tablets and books. So I'm able to take this indirect cost and distribute it to the different product lines. And then again, per unit, divided by the number of units. And now I can see the indirect caused by tablets and the indirect cost caused by books. Everybody's good? Okay, so the question asked you, what caused the cost to decrease? So what I did was I looked at the difference between the overhead that was allocated, and the difference was that idle capacity, organization, sustaining costs are not getting it, right? So under job order costing, we took all of that overhead, right? Including those idle capacity, organization, sustaining costs, and we distributed it to the products. Here we pulled them out. And so the difference is just that we didn't allocate those costs. It doesn't cost you anything different. It's just an allocation difference. Okay. Yeah, Danny.
Yeah, like, can you give like a good example of where ABC costing goes up compared to job order costing? Or would that generally not happen?
You know, it could, because remember, in this case here, and that's a good question, because in this case, they clearly are only allocating overhead, right? You're supposed to have period costs in there too. It should be any indirect cost, product and period. So you could have more costs getting allocated, even though you're pulling out that overhead that is your idle capacity organization sustaining, you should be also adding in period costs as well.
Okay.
Yep, that's a good question. And that would be a true activity-based costing system. I think they're just trying to keep it simple for you so that you can see that they're pulling out those organization sustaining costs. And if they added period, that would probably it would be too hard to tie them. But anyway, so what I'm showing you is the two different methods are giving you two different results, right? And if you're setting prices based on your job order costing, especially if you are in a competitive market, this would be a problem for you, right? So you're thinking your tablets are costing you 28, you're going to overprice your tablets when in fact it's costing you less, right? And then your books here, again, you're thinking you're looking at 61 versus 52. So if it's a competitive market and you're trying to set the right prices, it is really helpful for you to know what it's really costing you. Right, sound good? Making sense? All right, so we have 5 minutes. I'm going to start this problem and we'll come back to it on Wednesday, right? But I like this problem because it starts from the very beginning, right? So in the other problem, and you're going to see this, you're going to get these problems in various stages, right? The last problem already had the cost pooled into the cost pools. This one doesn't. So this one you have to do stage 1 allocation. So here they're telling you Advanced Products Corporation has supplied the following data from the activity-based costing system. Here's your overhead costs, not broken down into any activities. This is what they paid to everybody in terms of wages and salaries, and these are your other overhead costs. Right, then they're telling you, we have identified the activities here. The activities that happen is that we support our direct labor, right? So that would be like your indirect labor, right? So we're supporting direct labor, we're doing order processing, and then we have customer support. So these wages that you're paying your employees are doing these activities. Okay. Here's your activity measure. I'm going to take the costs here that are going to be pulled into this activity, and I'm going to spread them out based on direct labor hours. So this would be a unit level of activity. Order processing. I'm going to take that, and my activity measure is going to be the number of times the customer places an order. That would be your batch level, right? Your purchase orders. Customer support, dividing by the number of customers they have. So this is a customer level of activity. And then other, we're going to group it up, and then we're going to basically toss it out. So what I need to do, and take a look, this is your first stage allocation. So either through an interview process or by people wearing bracelets, these people supporting direct labor, what would have happened is I would have said, of all the people that I paid $300,000, 40% of their efforts went into supporting direct labor. So 40% of that cost was spent doing this activity. So 40% would be pooled into this activity. 30% are people taking purchase orders. So 30% of those wages would be pooled into this activity. 20% of the 300 are doing customer support. So 20% will be pooled here. And then 10% are doing something other than that. And I'm going to group that up, identify it, and toss it out. Right, so you can see, just like I had it set up for the C&C Sports, these are the costs that need to go into our 4 different identified activities. And then I'm doing the same thing for other overhead. So basically what I have are the numerators for my 3 activity rates. Now that I've identified the 70,000 in other, this is the last you're going to see of it. Okay, so we'll stop here. We'll come back to this problem and we'll do some more. What I want you to do is under the Chapter 7 folder, there's a case called Daytona. So I'm going to go through that. It's not a case that you have to prepare, but take a look at it. So we're going to go through it and we'll discuss it in theory as well as do the numbers, right? So this will give us another good chance to kind of do the numbers, but then make sure that you understand what's happening and what's the difference between job order costing and activity-based costing. So take a look at that so you can participate and you can ask questions. And then, and again, you're not going to submit it or anything. We're just going to do it together. But hopefully then we'll be able to kind of really put things together. All right, so I'll hang out if you have questions, but if not, I will see you Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank you.
All right, no questions. Either it was, I totally bored you because it's Monday and you too many numbers, or you're good. Is it making sense?
Yes.
Okay.